Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled Karen tried to run me over on my private property and called the police on me when I tried to defend myself. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. Has it really gotten to the point that just getting home safe now is something Karens have to self-insert themselves into? That is more of a rhetorical question because this entire story is about a Karen that kind of did that. I had gone to the store to get milk, I know, very exciting already, and on the way back home I ran into a Karen that seemed to have a serious issue with road rage. All she had to do was calm the hell down for like 5 minutes and there probably wouldn't have been a problem at all. To make the scene a little easier to imagine, I was going home from the store and the street had one lane going each way. There was a speed limit of 25 miles per hour, which I understand that some people might think is very slow. The road has a ton of hills though that make visualizing it hard as well as an elementary school, so I can understand the want for safety. It is around the time the kids get out and some walk home, so while I never speed on this road, there is no way I was going to do it that time of day. The person driving behind me was constantly blowing her horn and yelling out her window for me to hurry up and stop driving so slowly. Like any good driver would, I did not give in to Karen's demands and her road rage, and instead decided to be a little bit spiteful and went down to 25 miles per hour instead. A little further down the road is where I would turn off and go down my long driveway that leads to my house. Before that though, I ended up stopping several times to let any crossing children have the right of way, cars to go through, basically being the nicest guy in the world, and the angrier she got, the nicer I decided to be to everyone else on the road. I was in the military and I sure was not going to let this lady get me to break the law. I was also worried if I pulled off to the side and let her pass, then she might become a danger to someone else. Going back to the beginning though, the entire thing was only about 5 minutes of her being stuck behind me. It was not like I stopped my car and blocked her for hours. My turn came up and I pulled my car into the start of my driveway. I noticed that my kick has kicked his soccer ball and it must have went flying towards the edge of my property. I wanted to pick it up so it did not blow into the road, and so he did not get close to the road in order to get it. When I stopped and got out to get the ball is when things really started to heat up with Karen. Instead of just passing me, she stopped in front of my property and started screaming at me. Karen, are you serious right now with this? You keep me going slow for miles and now you're just going to act like a big tough guy while making me late. Me? It was not miles, and if you have to speed to be late, then frankly, you didn't leave early enough. I suggest that you go where you need to and leave me alone. Maybe work on that road rage while you're at it. Karen, I'm gonna kill you, you cocky douchebag. You want road rage? Then I'm going to show you. She stepped on her gas and drove her car onto my grass and right towards me. I was able to dive and roll out of the way while staying at an angle. That meant she could not just go reverse or drive right into me again. When you attack somebody that used to be in the military, you should be prepared for us to do what we are trained for. I went right to my side and pulled out my gun, pointing it at her. I was not messing around. Me? Turn off the car now, hands where I can see them. Karen, oh my god, you're pulling a gun on me? I'm going to get you arrested for this. Me, get off my land right this minute. She did end up backing her car off my property and I holstered my gun. But I was still keeping my hand close in case she decided to pull something again. I could hear that she was calling the police and telling them that some crazy guy had pulled a gun on her. I was more annoyed at the time being wasted than anything. I had milk to put in the fridge after all. There was no way I was going to walk away from this lady after she tried to hit me with her car. I waited for the police and of course, since they were told I had a gun, started yelling at me to put my hands up. She looked so smug when they took away my gun to make sure that I couldn't be a threat to them. Officer, sir, it is a crime to pull out a gun like that and threaten to shoot somebody. Me, officer, I have cameras set up and I can pull up the feed to let you watch what happened. She drove onto my grass in an attempt to hit me with her car. I was within my rights at that point to pull out the gun for my defense. Once she was off my property, I holstered my weapon and waited for you to arrive. They wanted to look at the footage as well as making sure that my gun was legally registered to me. One of the guys was also ex-military and could tell that my actions were a trained response. And he would have done the exact same thing. They asked me if I wanted to press charges against her for attempted assault, and I told them that I did. She was arrested, and the entire time she was screaming about how I had to be arrested because a gun is a weapon and a car is harmless. It actually got a little bit better though with what happened next. I gave my statement about the road rage, but since I did not have any footage of that, it would be hard to prove. It turns out that some of the local businesses and even the school had security cameras that caught the entire thing of her trying to make me speed up and honking at me like crazy. She got another charge thrown onto her for the road rage because her doing that where she did it was putting children and others in danger. He also told me that she tried to argue in court again that me owning a gun was illegal and I should be the one put in jail for it. She really had no concept that trying to run somebody over with her car after threatening them was knowingly attempting to assault them. I hope I never see another road raged Karen again, but if they come on my property, you can be sure I won't hesitate to pull out my gun. And yeah guys, it is just unfathomable for me the audacity these people have to come on someone else's property and then try to hurt them and then even call the police. Anyway, let's continue with the next one. The next one is titled Petty Revenge on the Neighbor. This started a few weeks ago. I have a rather large yard, just over an acre, in an old rural town with 11 neighbors along the perimeter. I've been very lucky in that everyone I know is pretty nice and helpful and most importantly keeps to themselves. I also have a very observant and territorial but not aggressive German Shepherd. He has some rather anxious tendencies and has been trained to go to the bathroom in one particular spot in the yard. He knows which neighbors he is allowed to see and it's only when they step in the yard to visit him. Another detail, he never leaves the yard and is almost exclusively off leash when I am home. I have one neighbor in the far corner of my yard who is a younger guy we will call Tom. Tom adopted what looks like a mixed breed dog after his elderly dog passed about 6 months ago. Tom has always seemed nice enough and we have only ever had pleasant but short conversations. About a month ago I started finding piles of dog waste in the corner near Tom's house. My dog is trained to use the opposite corner of our property and on the far side of our house, so I immediately suspected that Tom was letting his dog wander over. Over the next few weeks, I slowly asked the neighbors if they had seen anyone letting their dog go in my yard, and several said they saw Tom's dog loose in that part of the property. So I decided to not be confrontational about it since it is a real pet peeve and I let the embankment between our houses grow up so there would be a physical barrier, hopefully preventing the dog from coming over. I've been using the grass cuttings to fill a compost bin, so the dog waste was becoming a real problem, contaminating the parts of the yard I was trying to use. The strip of grass grew to be about 2 to 3 foot high and it seemed to be working. Then one day I came home and found that someone had run a mower along the flat part of the embankment on my property. The worst part was I had planted several small bushes the fall prior to establish a boundary and the mystery landscaper had cleaved one of them in half. The physical boundary was now about half the width that it was before and I immediately started finding dog poop in my yard again. Tom likes to work on cars and Tom also thinks he can keep his dog off leash. I was absolutely furious at this point and realized that I was in no state to go talk to him. I knew I would just blow up. So I noticed that his dog got super agitated when I let my dog out to play, so one evening I cranked a tennis ball into that corner of my yard while Tom was under the hood of his car. His dog immediately charged at my puppy from across the alley and Tom had to make a wild dive to catch him from coming over. My dog, on the other hand, could not have given a crap. He retrieved the ball and came right back as he always does. So about every third toss I would go in that direction and Tom would have to stop what he was doing and calm his dog. This went on for about 20 minutes until he was visibly agitated and took the dog inside. The next day I noticed Tom outside working, dog on the ground beside him. I bolted outside with my puppy and his favorite frisbee and giggled as Tom once again had to dive out from under the hood of his car to stop his dog and then spent the next half hour trying to calm him down. I have repeated this every day for the last week with the same results every single time. My wife has expressed some concerns about me not handling this like an adult, but I feel like I'm finally coming to the point of going and vaguely addressing the problem with him in a non-confrontational way. But before I do that, right now as I finish typing this, I'm going out for an evening game of catch with my doggo while my neighbor just so happens to be detailing his car. I found a fresh pile of poop while cutting grass this afternoon, and I want to get one more FU in before I go talk to him. Update: I discovered 3 piles of dog poop that I somehow missed while I was cutting grass. I grabbed a shovel and returned them to his side of the alley. And yeah guys, if you also enjoy the petty revenge stories, I would really appreciate it if you could like the video, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. The next one is a short story and it is titled Neighbor and the Handicapped Spot. I am disabled and have a placard allowing me to park in designated spots. The placards are only to be used when the disabled person is driving or a passenger. One of our neighbors, an able-bodied 20-something, has a disabled roommate who never leaves the apartment. He, however, being a lazy sack of excrement, kept parking in the spot and falsely using his roommate's placard. He would not move the car for weeks at a time, while I had to slowly make my way in agonizing pain to my door. I even fell a couple of times because I cannot walk far and can suddenly lose muscle tone. He was well aware of this. I got tired of reporting him and having nothing happen, so we bought a second car and have parked it in that spot. We swap the cars once a week and he is never getting that spot again. There are no other disabled residents who go out in this building, and there is nothing entitled about me using the parking place that I am legally allowed to use while preventing its criminal misuse. Oh, and by the way, I do work full-time in a professional capacity, unlike the criminal. The next one is a revenge story. I was waiting tables in an Italian restaurant that was originally opened by a man and his wife, but after their divorce, the restaurant was bought by their daughter. She was an okay boss, not fantastic, but not terrible. Her father, who had opened the restaurant, still worked as a cook and was a piece of poop. He called the waitresses cows behind their back and made a bunch of off-color comments while flirting with his favorite older ladies. He would scream at the younger women, bully cooks on the line, and there was a story about a mishap with some fryer oil and a fry cook a few years back. He did not give me a lot of crap because I was usually on my game, and I had the times down for how long most of the food took and adjusted for the load of the kitchen, so I was always present in the window when it was ready to go out. I always heard his little snide comments, muttered some of my own and give him a few times, but I always waited for the perfect time to get him and get him good for being such an insufferable prick. Finally, I got my chance. I had 2 plates up in the window when I walked into the kitchen. I was waiting on a third and a side of meatballs. He accosts me as soon as I walk up there and says something along the lines of, "Why don't you get this damn food out of my window?" I calmly looked at him and replied, "The next time you say something like that to me, this food is not going out. This food is going on the damn floor." This guy was easily 6 feet tall. I am 5 feet 1. He just kind of smirks and said, "I would like to see you try that." I picked up 1 plate of spaghetti and meat sauce, probably takes less than a minute to plate anyway, and just flipped it over in the window. And I need my order of lasagna and the side of meatballs too. The expo guy had a look of admiration on his face and shock at what I had done. He did not even seem pissed at having to replate the meal. I'm not sure though. I was blind with rage and marched out of the kitchen and out onto the floor. We were not really that busy. I think they had a bus kid clean it up. I was not spoken to about the incident except in passing, when the daughter admitted her dad could get a little intense. And her sister, who also worked there, explained that her sister often got into it with their father and it was not that big of a deal. He was always polite to me after that and never hassled me again. I nearly pooped myself when I realized what I had done though. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I wish that scene would have happened on one of Gordon Ramsay's shows. That would have been the icing on the cake. The next one is titled, I Got My Neighbor Towed. Basically, my neighbor across the street from me has 6 different cars and constantly parks the cars in front of my house, leaving me no place to park. I usually have to end up parking 3 or 4 houses down. Now, I know that the street is city property, however, all the cars on the street have expired tags. Over a year expired, most of them in 2021, meaning the cars have not been re-registered. Anyways, I called the city and got 4 of the cars towed, and now my neighbor is really mad and pointing the fingers at everyone on the block. Am I the a-hole? And yeah guys, please let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole or not? And furthermore, there was an update from OP and he said, I have talked to my neighbor a few times and they responded, it's a public street. Meanwhile, my grandma left her car on our street for 2 weeks last summer, and my neighbor put a note on the car almost every day asking for it to be moved when my grandma's car was parked in front of my own house. And a user in the comments said, not the a-hole, if you have 6 different cars you can park them in the garage, not the street. Unregistered cars have no business using public roads because they have not contributed to the cost of maintaining those roads. People who are saying you should have talked to them first, the fact that he's now targeting everyone on the street means he is already an entitled ass who would not have done anything about it had you talked to him first. Another user said, not the a-hole for having unregistered cars, which means the neighbor likely is not ever moving or driving them, but leaving them in the same place months on end, towed away. Street parking is available for anyone, so if someone parks in front of your house, you do have to deal with it. However, most places have limits, hours or days, not weeks or months. It's also for drivable cars, meaning registered and working. He is pointing fingers, but a parking enforcement officer could have just driven past. This is his own fault 100%, even if you made the call. And yeah guys, I'm not really sure what to think of that because I guess legally the neighbor is not really breaking any laws by parking 6 cars in the neighborhood. However, it's definitely a douchebag move to do this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Karen accused me of stealing my own car, tricked a dumb cop into arresting me, and now my car is a wreck because he gave her the keys. I really don't care who believes this, but here is my story. I live in one of those middle of nowhere desert towns where almost everyone knows almost everyone and it is hot as hell, but dirt cheap to buy a home or land in. And it is not uncommon for old cars to last out here as they almost never rust and people keep fixing them. After high school, I worked my ass off at a local job to get my own place. I ended up buying a small plot of land with a trailer on it off of a local guy that decided he was gonna move to Texas. And the guy also sold me his old Ford Escort prior to that. It was an okay first car, got me around well enough, still have it too. 10 years have gone by since then, and for a while I spent a lot of my time tinkering with an old 87 Monte Carlo that I bought super cheap as it was without an engine or transmission. I loved that car as an older cousin of mine had one when I was a kid and I always wanted one of my own. I spent 2 years fixing up the one I got with help from some friends and finished it in 2019. Since the engine was missing, I dropped in a junkyard Chevy 305 V8 that was connected to a rebuilt 4-speed automatic transmission with low miles from a totaled car. Then I painted it myself inside a friend's garage with a Harbor Freight sprayer and some GM black single-stage gloss paint and buffed it to a shine. And I finished it up with some gold Monte Carlo decals and some classic moon rims I bought from the local junkyard and polished up. I also partially redid the interior by replacing the seats and put in a custom steering wheel. I'm not really a mechanic, but my friends all helped me. And online how-to videos on my smartphone really helped as well. The car was fun to drive and looked good, and I kept it in good order. That is until this mess went down. Now, I did not really trust some of the local law enforcement out here before, and this gave me even more reason not to. A lot of the cops around here are barely qualified for the job. They are practically hired with a handshake and just told to play Doom for training. Should have gone for Quake in my opinion, but anyway, granted though, many of them are really nice. The sheriff is even kind of a friend of mine, but he is really one of the only competent ones out there. Most of the rest really don't do their jobs very well, especially whenever a new one gets hired on. Like a guy that went out of his way to move to my town just to get to be a cop. In this case, he was the nephew of the sheriff. He even brought his own Crown Vic with a loudspeaker to drive around town. Let's call this guy NC for nephew cop, since he was the sheriff's nephew. NC and I didn't know each other personally yet, but I was aware of him and he was dumb as a rock and high on his own ego. He was like Barney Fife and John Cena had an illegitimate son together because he was a tall, strong-looking man that was always giving people creepy looks and patrolled on foot up and down Main Street with a clipboard in hand and a big grin on his face. He also liked to publicly flex his muscles in front of people. One Saturday morning, I took my Monte Carlo out to meet a friend, but they ended up bailing because of a last-minute issue with their girlfriend. I thought, oh, no problem, I will just get some fast food and go home. I went to the local burger place and got a meal to go. And as I was walking out, there was a lady outside looking over my car. She was bent over in a very short skirt and not gonna lie, I enjoyed the view. People would stop here and there to ask me about my car and where I got it. I usually don't mind talking so long as they are polite, though this woman ended up anything but. She was curvy and good looking while wearing a black mini skirt. I am guessing early to mid-30s, not really sure. I asked her if she liked my car. She stood up, took one look at me and snickered. I asked her what was so funny. To get an idea of what I looked like at the time, I was a skinny guy with a scraggly beard and was wearing a faded AC/DC t-shirt with the sleeves ripped off, along with worn-out cut-off denim shorts and flip-flops. I guess she figured I was poor or something, so she was probably judging my appearance. She looked me up and down in a very obvious way and then said, "There is no way this is your car. You couldn't possibly afford something this nice." Now, I have a tendency to get sarcastic or snide when people make assumptions about me, so I said back, "Oh really, lady? The title is in my name, and these keys right here in my hand say that I am the owner too." The Karen just glared at me as I put the keys in the lock and began to open the door. I looked behind her and noticed a beige 90s Volvo with a missing headlight and had out-of-state plates on it, parked not too far from me. I put two and two together and laughed. "Let me guess, lady, that's your car over there?" She started to turn beet red. I laughed and said, "Oh, don't be ashamed. Those things aren't lookers, but they will run forever." I figured this was over, but as I was opening my car door, I suddenly felt her nails digging into my shoulder. She was screeching so loud, my ears were hurting. And before I could turn around, she kicked me between my legs from behind with a high-heeled shoe so hard I collapsed in agony. And true to my luck, NC drove right up because he had heard her screeching from down the street during his noon patrol. As soon as NC was out of his car, the Karen ran to him crying and saying that I was a carjacker that was attempting to take her new car. I wasn't looking at either of them as I was on the ground wincing in a fetal position from the pain. The next thing I heard was NC yelling, "Put your hands behind your back!" And then I was being pinned down by his knee on my spine and forcibly cuffed. I tried telling NC that I knew his uncle and can prove that I'm the real owner of the car. But he called me white trash and told me to shut up. Then he picked my keys up off the ground and actually handed them to the Karen. Then he seemed to do a hero pose while she gave me a crap-eating grin. No matter what I said, NC was not listening to me because he fully believed her. And then I had to see Karen start up my car and drive off with it. My heart sank as I watched it sail down the road with her flipping me off. Then NC dragged me back to the sheriff's office. I had hoped his uncle was in, but just my bad luck, he was out to lunch. So NC put me in the cell and told me to keep quiet. I was pissed, but I knew I wasn't gonna make my situation any better. So I just waited, and during that time NC kept giving me looks of contempt. At one time, he walked across the cell with a nightstick, grazing it against each bar like he was trying to intimidate me. At least an hour went by and the sheriff finally came through the door, nursing a big gulp. But froze the second he saw me. "OP, what are you doing here?" he asked. I was about to speak when NC jumped in and said, "I caught this lowlife creep trying to steal a lady's car, so I hauled him in." That is when I finally got my chance to speak and said, "Yeah, only it was my car, the one I spent so long fixing up." NC just rolled his eyes and said not to listen to me, but the sheriff silenced him and asked for my full story. As I tried to tell it, NC was making dismissive looks and kept repeatedly interrupting until the sheriff told him to sit down and shut up. Then when I was finally able to say everything that happened, he was furious. The sheriff laid into NC, who was cowering in a chair like a little boy and saying that it indeed was my car and he stupidly gave my keys to a thief that had assaulted me. NC started frantically apologizing and trying to say he was just trying to help. But the sheriff called him an idiot that just wanted to play hero by saving a damsel in distress. And now the whole department would be in hot water for his unlawful arrest and physical assault against me. Then he finally let me out of the cell, I got some ice for my crotch and got taken home. The sheriff and NC went back to the burger restaurant, but the Karen's car was no longer there. They got the CCTV footage from the camera the restaurant had looking outside. It caught everything minus the audio. The Karen came back riding piggyback with a guy on a motorcycle over half an hour from the time she left with my car. She blew him a kiss and then drove off in her Volvo. The sheriff scrambled everyone, even NC, to try and chase her down. But they couldn't find her as she had already driven out of the county lines. Some phone calls were made to other departments to look for her. And I had to sit at home with an ice pack on my crotch all evening waiting for news on what happened. A couple days later my car was found just a few miles out of town. The Karen had broken all of the windows with what I am assuming was the tire iron and then put the car in neutral and let it coast down a deep rocky hill which rolled it into the bottom ditch, which smashed the front end and warped the frame. It was completely totaled. I wanted to cry from the sound of metal grinding on rock as the tow truck pulled it back up. NC was there too, and he couldn't even look at me the entire time. My insurance also did not want to cover the car. So the sheriff's office was made to pay me the value of my Monte Carlo instead, since NC let it happen. Which, by the way, was only about 5 grand, though that was honestly close to what I had into it since I did almost all the work by hand with the help of friends. NC also paid me another 2,000 for my troubles and said it was most of his savings. The Karen was caught at a motel at State over some time later and arrested for soliciting prostitution and drug possession. Grand Theft Auto was just one of the many things she was charged with. I got on a video call just to see her in court and testify. She looked like a wreck the whole time because she knew she was screwed. And it was not long before she was pronounced guilty. She got 10 years behind bars with no possibility of parole. As for NC, the sheriff all but begged me not to sue him because he was his nephew and he promised his sister he would look out for the guy. I'm not a sue-happy person, so I let it go, provided NC actually takes some sort of course on how to properly do his job. And so the incident was more or less rug-swept and NC was demoted to sitting at a desk all day answering phones, and they would be docking part of his pay until every penny was paid back. He is still regulated to desk duty half of the time these days, and he still avoids me anytime I am near him. Arguably, he's a better cop now though because he mellowed out. As for me, it took some time, but with help I finally located a replacement Monte Carlo project car with a clean title. And it was the same year too. I salvaged as many parts as I could from my old one and used it all in the build. The engine and transmission were still good, and somehow so were most of the base parts. And the sheriff personally came by to help my friends and I build the new car in his downtime. It took a year, but now I've got a fresh looking Monte Carlo that just looks like my old one. You would never know they were not the same car. I've made sure to have better insurance this time around, and I'll be damned if I ever let a Karen near my car again. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again tomorrow.